when I saw what they were first working on, before I was hired, it was very far from the animated version. I think that they didn't understand how important the animated version was to our generation. And so I was actually pushing them more towards the humor and the music and the plot. And they felt, I think they were looking at the same source material of the Kipling and going a different way than Walt Disney went. And to me, it was the Disney version was a strength and a source of inspiration for me. But I also understood that we had to make a movie that wasn't just a children's movie. If you make a movie of this size, it has to be for all audiences. And so the excitement has to be there. But I felt that there was a way that you can have both. And so what you're seeing is my taste of what I love about the old one included. But it wasn't until I showed audiences, honestly, to the last few weeks, and I'm realizing that people are accepting of it. Because I could have just as easily been, I would have believed you if you told me that people didn't have my same tastes. And as a filmmaker, that's the scary part, because you can only satisfy yourself and the small group of people around you. And you show it to audiences, but this film isn't complete until the very end. So you really aren't showing the final film until it's done. And so that was part of what kept me up at night. But now it seems that people are accepting of the tone of it and my version of it. And so it's a big relief and a sense of satisfaction, because this movie belongs to the fans. The original belongs to the fans more than it belongs to Disney. We grew up with it, it's ours. And so if people felt that that was betrayed, it would have been very, very hard for me. I would have felt disappointed that I let people down. For the actors playing the voices, it was easy to choose who I wanted, but it wasn't necessarily easy to get them to be involved. In both the French version and the English version, we were very fortunate to have wonderful, wonderful movie stars that brought a lot of humanity and personality to the roles. When all the characters are digital, you rely very heavily on the actors to bring the humanity to bring these characters to life. Well, first I'll say I'm happy to hear that you think I start from the visual first, because I came from writing and I came from words and stories. So it's been an evolution for me to understand the visual language of cinema. And to do, as you work your way towards animation, because I think all film now, especially visual effects film, the line is blurring very much between what's animation and what's live action. But I think that the challenge for me, the opportunity here, is to take the best of both. Yeah. So what animation has live action beat with is story. And it dates back to Walt Disney. It was always very expensive and time consuming to have animation done. And they wanted to make sure the story was perfect before they ever started rendering. In their case, it was with paintbrushes. But it's the same thing at Pixar. Very expensive to render, and so they'll look at a dozen versions, usually 7 or 8 versions actually, of a story done with pencils in animatic form before they ever commit to making the movie. And that's why I think the stories tend to be better. The batting average, how would you say, I don't know, yeah, do you know what that is here? Yeah. So the batting average is you have a greater rate of success on any given animated film. Animated films tend to be better in general than live action movies. You have some great live action movies, but there are a lot of bad ones. With a Pixar movie and a Disney animation movie, most of them are better because I think they're a lot more work and scrutiny goes into the story ahead of time, whereas with live action, you'll film it, you'll edit it, you'll reshoot. I have chef training from the last movie, Chef. It's more like baking, where everything has to be measured first, and then you get the bread, whereas it's more like being a savory chef, where you can add a little salt, a little pepper, you can mix it up, taste it, change it, add water. You're not going to remember all this, I'm sorry. But so I think that the planning phase is much more discipline in animation, and that's where you can learn a lot, and I think that's why it makes me a better filmmaker to learn from the animation process. I think the biggest challenge was getting the tone right, because the animated film was for a musical for children, and the Kipling was kind of an intense story that was geared towards an older audience. Walt Disney shied away from the scarier aspects for this particular film, but doing it in photoreal, I felt that it was important to make it an adventure movie for all ages, not just for children. So we went in the United States from a G to a PG, and so I looked at other Disney classics to help with the tone, like Lion King, that had humor and music, but also had scary parts and violence, and also looked at the original, the Big Five Disney movies, Dumbo, Snow White, Bambi, Fantasia, Pinocchio, where they would have scary parts, but you keep the violence off screen. So I tried to land on a tone that was appropriate to Disney, but still have images and music and characters from the '67 animated film. We used the techniques that were used by other films. So the beginning, we treated it like an animated film, like Pixar would, you know, with pencil drawings and coming up with show reels. Then we did a whole motion capture shoot that looked very similar to Avatar, and we used a lot of the same people and the same equipment as Avatar did. And then at the end, it was a live action shoot, but it was geared towards visual effects, kind of like if you saw what they did for Gravity, where everything was planned ahead of time and we filmed the person in the exact lighting that we needed. Boy, in '67 there were no female characters, and that would feel strange now. And maybe because I have daughters and a lot of women in my life, I notice it more than I did when I was little. And I think each time you retell a story, you have to update it for your time. And so that's one of the many things. I think we updated certain themes, and we updated the gender balance a little bit, and also Raksha, who Lupita Nyong'o plays, very important in the Kipling, but almost completely ignored in the Disney. And also, I don't know, I don't want to spoil for people watching, but there's she's not just the mom. If you notice at the end, she's the alpha too, which is not. To me, I think that's also something that is, as somebody with daughters too, it's like important, I think, that's what today is, that's what it is. So I wanted it to reflect, even though it is ancient times in the animal kingdom, I still think it's important to present a version to the world that reflects the world. So Lion King, actually, Kipling has the stampede as the Lion King, I believe the character, the father, it gets killed in the stampede, and I think it's Shere Khan actually in the Kipling that gets killed by the stampede, or is it Aquila? I get confused. I don't remember the source material that well. But the images from Lion King, some of them come from Kipling. Also, a lot of the animation. If you look at the animation of Jungle Book, and it clearly informed Lion King. But in turn, Lion King was very helpful to us, mostly for tone, because it did show that you can have those tones mix in a movie of our era. Because when you go back to Snow White, there's very scary things. Pinocchio, very scary images, almost horror movie images in there. Her transformation into the witch, the queen into the witch. It was very intense for its time. Even still, it's intense. But it's hard to take film language from an older era and say it would apply today. Lion King was helpful because we knew we could have music and silly humor and mix it with violence, with animals that are fighting each other, and even the death of an important character with an emotional significance. So it was very helpful for me to be able to reference Lion King, which is celebrated as a classic, a modern day classic, that helped me navigate through the challenges of our version of the Jungle Book. Growing up, I loved Baloo because I think the idea that he's funny, everybody likes funny characters, but that he was also protective. And as a kid, that's, I think, that combination of somebody who's funny and a friend and protective, and a parent, but somebody who you get into trouble with, but ultimately you were safe with. And I liked the relationship between them. And one of the images I wanted to make sure I had in the film that I remembered was them floating down the river together and singing. And if you see a sculpture or a frame from the old Jungle Book, it always tends to be that moment. And I might add, it was a very difficult moment because bears don't float like that in real life.
But then they don't sing.
They don't sing either, right? They don't sing, they don't float. I had everything against me on that. And then water's very hard to do too. And so we had to look at research because they would send me pictures of him floating on the back, right? With like like he was paddling with the head out and he was riding on his back in the water. And I said, you can't have it on the back. It has to be floating. And so, but bears don't float that much. And so we were looking at polar bears. That's the reference we found of polar bears floating on their back. If you ever see them in the zoo or in the Arctic, they float. They're not very buoyant. Their feet stick out a little bit. And we started that as the basis for our animation. And we saw how far we could push it, but that you'd still believe the physics of it.